Welcome to Science for Hire with your host, Dr. Charles Handler. Science for Hire provides 30 minutes of enlightenment on best practices and news from the front lines of the employment testing universe.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Science for Hire. I am your host, Dr. Charles Handler, and the parade of all-star guests just keeps coming. Today, my guest is Cole Napper. I will say he is a fellow Louisiana person here, which there's not that many of us. We all have to stick together. And so he's a veteran of the Louisiana Tech program, which is really a great program. It didn't really exist when I was looking for grad school. So glad that we have options in the state. And as I always do, I'll let Cole introduce himself. But one more kind of thing to mention is that I was on Cole's Directionally Correct podcast, which was the most fun podcast I've ever been on, and he's really inspired me to make mine more fun, so we'll see what we can do. I don't have any silly sound effects or anything like that other than the ones I can, make on my own, but we'll be able to, I think, have a really fun journey today through a lot of different topics. So without further ado, my guest, Cole Napper.
Yeah, well, we can make some sound effects if you want. I don't know if the audience will like it, though.
There's a dog in the office, so I might be able to get it to bark on cue.
But yeah, maybe I'll do kind of a non-traditional introduction just because of the context you set. But I am originally from Monroe, Louisiana, which is probably a big part of my identity, and I appreciate you bringing it up because I'm very fond of the state of Louisiana. I actually live in Texas now, but I live a stone's throw away, you might say, and I come back quite often. I'll actually be there later this week, and Louisiana is the only place that I know of that has drive-through daiquiris, and so I'm a big fan of that. When I go back, it's just a cool part of the culture and everything, but. So like you mentioned, I graduated from Louisiana Tech's IO Psychology PhD program. I was actually in the first cohort there, and so that definitely dates me in terms of the time frame of how long that program has existed. But I really a huge fan of that program and some of the faculty there, like Tillman Sheets was my advisor. He's just a phenomenal guy. And I think that they've really done things the right way in terms of bridging the scientist-practitioner gap. My day job, I'm the VP of People Analytics for a company called Orgnostic. And as you mentioned, I also am the co-host of the Directionally Correct podcast about people analytics with Scott Hines as well, who's another graduate of Louisiana Tech's program. And we do try to have some fun, and so I hope we can have some fun on here today, Charles.
I know we will, absolutely. So I'll tell you, the drive-through daiquiri
Well, and I
thing.
did have a question, actually.
Yeah.
You said it was the most fun you'd ever had on a podcast. Was that the only podcast you'd ever been on? Because I was like, we're a low bar.
Well, I've been on a few. Few, but not a whole lot. I expect to probably be on more as time goes on and people find me, etc. I don't know. I'm not a buttoned-up guy to begin with, but on these things, for whatever reason, I've kept it a little bit more business-like, and you guys had a lot of little fun non sequiturs. I will say, and this is I don't know when this episode exactly is going to air, but I am working on taking what you inspired me to do and turning it into almost like a little quiz show, live video stream called Take It or Leave It. And in that,
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, in that it's going to be, I've actually played a game show host before in a lot of different, roles in terms of dramatic productions and things. And so I'm good in that role. I can really get into the character. It's just going to be current, news articles. I'm going to have a guest and we're going to, thumbs up, take it or leave it. There will be sound effects, most likely, and I'm learning to do, video production. I don't know if you've ever seen something like this. This is called a stream deck. I had never heard of one of these before. But,
I don't know what that is.
Well, it's got all these buttons, right? And so as you're doing whatever your thing is, you have macros loaded on there. So cue the intro, bing, you press the button. Cue the.
Oh, it's like a soundboard.
Yeah, kind of, but it's all macroed out, so you can just do what exactly you need pre-programmed for someone like me who's not a sound engineer. So I'm going to be playing with that, but that's going to be a lot more whimsical and a lot more centered around, okay, here's some latest news articles, about stuff we do, right? Technology especially, is it bogus or not? And we'll just kind of have a vote. So stay tuned. You might get invited to that. And it's a safe bet. And so you mentioned the drive-through daiquiri shops. And so we do have those here. And I belong to this car club where we all have vintage cars. And so we have a thing every year called the daiquiri rally. So if you know about like the Paris to Dakar rally, it's a take on that. And it's like a true rally. You get an envelope, you open the envelope, you stamp your time, and there's heaps of people. And then in there, it's a map to 4 different daiquiri shops around the area that spread out. So you're in like a 30 or 40 mile radius, and you have a co-pilot navigator, and you go in, you get the daiquiri, you bring them back. At the end, everybody brings them back, and then you got daiquiris to drink. No drinking while you're driving, but and then you stamp the timestamp when you get back. So it's like a true rally, but you're actually collecting daiquiris from different daiquiri shops, and we just did that. It's every October, so it was super fun.
Well, I don't have a classic car, but that would be so fun to participate.
Yeah,
in.
you don't have to. There were people in like just an SUV, you don't actually have to have a classic car. I will say that I've done it maybe 4 times, and my success rate of actually finishing has been about half. Seems like my stuff breaks down a lot, but that just happens. I'm used to it by now, man. The AAA is a really good investment. So let's hear a little bit about people analytics. I mean, it's a term you see everywhere. If you're just seeing people's titles on LinkedIn and stuff, it's always, not always. There are a lot of people analytics. And I'm sure it has a pretty umbrellaed meaning, but I bet it means a lot of different things too. And so as someone who is in people analytics and has a podcast on people analytics and is probably damn good at people analytics, tell our listeners what it means to you. What should they think when they see somebody's job title that says people analytics, and why would you be reaching out to somebody like that or something,
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and there's definitely not consensus on what it means, and so I think it's worth asking. And I'll kind of pick on Scott here for a second, just because he's my co-host and we've talked about it before on the podcast. But I think in his mind, IO psychology and people analytics are somewhat synonymous. I am actually not in that camp. I would say that, think of it like a Venn diagram. There's definitely overlap between the two, but there are IO psychologists that are not doing people analytics, and there are people analytics folks that are not doing IO psychology. And so I take a big tent definition of what you might call traditional people analytics. Now, like the biggest tent would just be any analytics related to people, but I don't think that's fair.
That's an easy out right there.
And I don't think it's accurate either, because there's lots of analytics that go on in the world about people that aren't called people analytics, right? And like just an example would be like analytics related to sports players. Well, they don't call that people analytics,
right?
They just don't. But that would fit the definition.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, it would be any kind of analytics or data about employees of an organization, or maybe even the labor market that's outside of the organization, and trying to use that information to inform business decisions. It's probably the easiest way of putting it.
Gotcha.
And the aspects that are related to IO is a lot of what we learn in terms of like the research methods, the multivariate stats, and just understanding the cognitions of employees in the workplace, right? The things that are people analytics but not really related to IO psychology is things like data engineering, data management, some of the machine learning techniques, like some of the more esoteric or sophisticated things that are going on out there. There are IO psychologists out there that know those things, but it's not a part of our core discipline that we really learn about in graduate school.
Sure.
And so I'd really say that's kind of where the Venn diagram loses its overlap.
I like thinking in Venn diagrams, and I just wrote down on my notepad here, data scientist. So now I'm starting to visualize a Venn diagram that has all the different things that IOs do in terms of titles, right? We certainly work in different areas, executive coach or curriculum developer, whatever it is, but more just in the idea of how we're labeling ourselves around the things that we do with data, I guess, really, right? That's pretty interesting. And data science is one that for the past probably 5 years, I'd say, it's really started to enter into the vocabulary you're starting to see. And I think even in my program, there's such an overlap between IOs and use of statistical analysis, even in more sophisticated ways, right? We're trained to do that. Luckily for me, it was pretty simplistic back then. I'm not really a good programmer, developer type person, and it really crosses over those kind of skills when you're looking at writing code to do all kinds of interesting things. It's a dimension I wish I had in my bag of tricks, but I know people, so that's how you get that done. People, but that's cool. So, and I'm channeling you here. What's your wackiest people analytics moment? What's the craziest thing as a people analytics person that you've ever dealt with that you'd like to tell that story?
Well, before I get into the funny story, I think it's an important clarification along the lines you were saying about data science, and I find a really practical way to translate this for IO psychologists to understand kind of some of the similarities and some of the differences and what it would take if you wanted to bridge that gap is thinking about traditional research versus traditional product development, right? And so traditional research, let's say just for the sake of argument, you're going to do a research project. You go through the entire scientific method. It takes 6 months to do. You collect your data. You do all the things that we know how to do really effectively. It just takes time.
Yeah.
Well, and part of that process is usually modeling.
Yeah.
Right? Now, a data scientist comes along, and maybe they have a different lexicon in terms of how they talk about things, but they're doing modeling as well. But chances are the modeling that they're doing isn't going through the scientific method and process. It's probably putting what they call a model into production.
Yep.
Which means it's just running natively in the background using software. And so the way I put it is, what data scientists are doing is just an extension of what we do. It's just doing it in real time. And so science shouldn't take as long as it takes. And so how could you shorten that time frame? It's by putting things into production and building products around it to do it automatically. In terms of like wacky people analytics stuff, let me think for a second, because that's really a good question.
So think about it while I comment on what you're saying. If
Cool.
If your brain can work that way, hopefully it's not a cognitive processing challenge. I don't think it is for you though. So the first thing I thought of is sometimes, and this is not a knock against data science, this is a way I'm using just hyperbole, is maybe sometimes it's soulless. Like you just look at the data, you follow the data, it's almost purely empirical, right? And I've worked with a lot of data scientists, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts when you do that. I mean, there's a lot of common procedures, but there's just a fundamental philosophy. If you're not trained in any kind of psychology or more mental measurement, whatever, that you're just looking for features, and what they call validation is, the model predicts, it works, but it doesn't have that external validity of, this is actually predicting something that's really important for us in a specific way and accounting for variance in this. There's subtle differences, and I might even be butchering those, but I feel like the best combination is, again, this Venn diagram of an individual or a team where you have both of those mindsets, right? So you're good at exploring and building the models, but you also understand the ingredients of the models, the features of the model, how important those are and what they relate to. It's just goes back to the, basic IO grad school idea of Dust Bowl empiricism, which we had a lot of in our field a long time ago. And when you follow those things, what I think you lose a lot of time is the generalizability of the model too, right? You have this model, it's very trained on a very specific set of data. And then you try to say, okay, well, we're going to select all call center representatives across the world with this model we built in, Akron, Ohio. And it may not generalize, especially the more faceted it is and everything. So that's kind of my take on that. It's about the external validity. And I would say, we're trained to do the research methods. If you think about doing a validation study, like an IO validation study. I've probably done a zillion of those. I love them every time I can because you can prove the value, hopefully, of what you're doing, or show the company that what they're using, never something built by me, of course, isn't working. So from that standpoint, it's great. And that process does take time. It's not a laboratory research project, but it does take a lot of time. If you have the archival data available, that's great. The projects where I've been lucky enough to work with a corporation that has an internal HR data, warehouse and team that only does that, where you send them an empty spreadsheet and they send you back a pretty clean data set or set of data sets for you to analyze. That's amazing. Like that's
yeah,
something.
that has to be the best.
Yeah. It's a unicorn, but it does happen. So hopefully that gave you some time to think about your wackiest story. If not, we can keep talking, and when it comes up, just let me have it.
No, I thought of something. It's pretty wacky. I'm not going to get into the specifics just because of agreements I had with prior employers.
Yeah.
But I remember when COVID happened, a company I work for actually had some essential workers, and our team got tasked with trying to build epidemiological models to see how much COVID would spread throughout the teams that had to work in these facilities. And that was wild. First of all, it was wild in the sense that our models were completely wrong. Yeah. But it was also wild in the sense that, I remember there was these famous researchers, I think in Britain somewhere, who had built these models of how COVID was going to spread around the whole globe. And that was kind of what went into the reason why lockdowns were put into place. And we had kind of used those exact same techniques internally. And it was wild just to feel like you were part of history.
Yeah.
That's
I don't know. So cool.
It was crazy because I'm not an epidemiologist, and so we probably did everything wrong. But just to make a plug here, it was probably directionally correct. Let's say.
Yeah, there you go. Plug for your podcast. But that's super interesting. I mean, everybody's, I think, got a COVID work story. I mean, modeling that. So I'm just thinking about, okay, what variables are in the equation? Do they have PPE? What PPE are they using? There's a lot of things like that, right? And we would all hope that wearing a hazmat suit would keep you away from the COVID thing. It's really interesting, man. When COVID started, I watched this. I've never done this before, but I watched on this it's called Masterpieces series or something. It's like academics. There was 24 episodes of this thing with this woman of several different people, but one professor of medieval history. It was the entire entire story of the plague in Europe. I mean, from beginning to end, 20 hours. I watched this. I can't believe it.
You clearly have more free time than I do,
Well,
Charles.
I like to watch a little TV in the evenings. I mean, it took me 3 weeks. It's not like I binged watched it.
Yeah, okay. You didn't just binge it all the way
man,
through.
She was knowledgeable, and boy, we're lucky, first of all, that what COVID was controllable enough for us, because that thing wiped out about half the population of Europe, and it lasted on and off for about 100 years. And so, you never got rid of it. You had these waves. So I don't know. I always like a little perspective. I'm like, okay, I feel pretty lucky that we just got the COVID, or I think if we'd had, obviously, modern medical technology back then, we'd be fine, because it's a known thing with an antidote now, but at that time. And then there's the Spanish flu epidemic, which everybody kind of glossed over. That was also, I think, early 1900s. That killed a lot of people. So we're all lucky to be on the other side of COVID. Did COVID change anything about doing people analytics for you at all? Anything?
Well, in a kind of a micro sense and a macro sense, yes. In a micro sense, COVID changed the whole game of the focus of people analytics teams, where they went through the whole leaving the office and return to office debate, right? And they had to do supporting and confirmatory and disconfirmatory research throughout to say, where are our employees? How productive are our employees? If we go back to the office, what is the sentiment going to be around our employees? How many people are going to quit? All of that kind of modeling that goes into these type of decisions. And a lot of that modeling was actually neglected by organizational leaders, by the way.
Of course. Of course. That's part of what we do, isn't it? Get ignored.
Yeah. In the macro sense, it thrusts people analytics into the limelight.
Yeah.
We were, again, just, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but we were just a basic HR function before that. It had gained a lot of momentum prior to the pandemic, but during the pandemic, I know of teams that were meeting with the CEOs every week. And that is not a typical occurrence for a people analytics team. And so it really got thrust into the limelight. And I'll actually say, just because the pandemic sort of waned, I think our field of people analytics has sort of had an identity crisis of sorts since then, because we were so important for a period of time, and our importance is somewhat being diminished now because things are going back to normal. And I think some teams are struggling with that they, maybe it's like a retired athlete. They used to be at the top of their game, and now they're kind of having to go back and sit on the couch some. And I think we're struggling with that a little bit.
So you're saying people analytics is a one-hit wonder or something, but they ignored you, it sounds like. Some of
No,
it.
they say you have your whole life to write your first album,
Right.
and then you've got like a year to write your second album. And so we got to write our second album.
Yeah. Well, we know it's valuable. One of the interesting things you just brought up, and I've been working a lot with this as I kind of get in more to the AI ethics and AI governance, which is fascinating to me, and I'm enjoying continual education on that. But one of the things you look at is psychological safety around the use of AI in the workplace. And you mentioned, monitoring productivity. And I know that there's, if there's a poster child for what makes you feel insecure in a workplace, it's being monitored. Although Tara Barron and her lab have some really great research about, that I would like to just kind of call out, is that if the company informs people and gives them a reason why, and it's not some sneaky thing where, people feel like they're being big brother a whole lot, it really tends to be more accepted. But just in general, I don't think anybody necessarily likes that. So how were you, if you could even say, how were you guys measuring productivity? Did you have like some kind of software or data collection device that was looking at what people were doing?
So a lot of there's anything you could think of, somebody probably tried it out, right? And so it's hard to say a general theme. I would say for some of the people I respected out there that did this effectively, is they would find functions where productivity is easy to quantify, and then they would do research beside that to show self-reported productivity correlated to actual productivity.
Right.
And then they would use those measures of self-report throughout the rest of the business to say, if we can see this correlation in one part of the business where it's easy to quantify, and we show that there's that relationship, we could probably logically expand that to the rest of the business. And so I think that's how some of the companies did it. I actually have really strong feelings on the whole electronic monitoring employee productivity debate. And I'll tell somewhat of I don't know if this is apocryphal. It's just a real story. We actually had a company reach out to our podcast who does this electronic performance monitoring stuff, like the mouse clicking, the eye tracking, all of the like, and they wanted to sponsor us. And I was like, well, we'll take your money, but we're not going to be nice to you.
Right.
Right. And so they said, oh, no. We want to come on because we want to explain how we're the good and ethical kind of doing this, and we're not the evil, like dystopian, Orwellian type of company who's doing this. And I said, that's fine. Bring your data. I promise you, I have a scientific orientation. I will definitely give you a fair shake. But just know, I'm predisposed to think that you're probably doing some screwed up stuff here. And so I come down on this stuff very difficult. And the reason why I mentioned them, because you said, like, is people analytics doing this? The primary customer of this organization was actually IT functions, not people analytics. And that's why they were trying to get a name in the people analytics space by coming to our podcast, because no people analytics teams were buying their products.
Interesting. Did you change that for them?
No, we ended up not doing it, but yeah.
Gotcha. Interesting. So one thing that, this is another, like, I need, there's things in future episodes I might do, again, inspired by you. I need some kind of like a sign or a sound effect that's like, it's LLM Chat
It's
GPT
LLM
time. It
time.
needs to have like a um, there's a game show, You Bet Your Life, with Groucho Marx. I don't know if you know that anything about that. It's from the 50s, I think. There was he would say the magic word and the duck comes down, and a duck would come down from the ceiling, and that would be like the on Pee Wee's Playhouse, the word of the day. Everybody's excited.
Charles,
So
I gotta say this, man. You seem like you would be fantastic to have a beer with, like off the podcast, because you got a lot of interesting stuff I'd love to learn about.
oh yeah, well I'm sure you do as well, and we can always make that happen for sure. You can't do that over the ether though. I
No,
went to
you
some
can't.
beginning of the pandemic. I went to some virtual cocktail parties with like my friends from college. It was great to see them because I hadn't seen a lot of them, but it's nice to be able to hug people.
Yeah, for
Anyway,
sure.
so one of the things in looking at kind of the what LLMs are doing to help people be more efficient, right? There's a whole thing of people in the workplace using them to get their jobs done faster, not telling other people because they either feel guilty about it or they feel like their employer would be upset with them because they're getting paid. So I read an article where it's just different stories from people, and one guy's like, yeah, I work remotely. I can get all my assigned work tasks done in 3 hours, and the rest of the day I just goof off because I'm getting everything done that I need to. And so there's kind of a little bit of a ethical dilemma there, right? And a dilemma for the company. I think if they knew that, they would probably not be super happy with it. But at the same time, the guy's getting his work done, right? So I feel like a lot of people would say, hey, I can do more. So I interviewed Chat GPT for a podcast episode. I asked it a little bit about that. Hey, what would you do? How should companies handle that? And is it a problem? And of course, nothing that GPT does is a problem in its opinion. But it just said, well, that guy needs more work responsibilities. The company needs to give him more stuff to do, but they may not know. So I guess the point is, you could take it either way. You could be more productive with it or less. But I wonder if maybe that's another reason why employers might want to monitor what's going on with their employees at work, especially remote employees, because maybe there is more time they could give. But I don't know, that maybe that was a little bit of a non sequitur. But these are the modern problems that we're starting to have around productivity. And if you track that guy's productivity, I guess depending on how you did it, right? Either you would see that he was logged onto his work computer for 8 hours and only 3 hours of stuff got done, or you wouldn't be tracking that. You'd ask him how productive he was, or you'd see that his objectives are met. So the data behind that's very different depending on what the source is. That guy could get away with not getting exposed for a very, very long time, but with some monitoring, he might be busted, right away. I don't know.
So I'm not even sure that some of the employee performance monitoring software would actually catch it. What they again are usually doing, again, if the person just left their desk for hours at a time, they'll catch that, but they wouldn't actually be able to diagnose what the person was doing or why they were away from their desk. These software, from what I gather, are just not that intelligent to be able to say, oh, this person just wasn't working in one way or another. I will say it does bring up a lot of interesting points on in terms of what does it mean? Like, is there like a winner's curse for being really good at your job? All right. So presumably, if you're able to automate 70, 90% of your job, that's because you were really good at your job. And is there a curse that now you have to work even harder because you were so good to automate it, whereas maybe your peer group wasn't as good as you and was not able to automate it? All right. But then there's the other side of it, which is the organizational perspective, which is if 90% of your job can be automated, is that
Yeah.
even a job anymore? Right. And should we just automate all of it for all the people who do this type of work? And I mean, I feel like there's a variety of different perspectives beyond the two I just mentioned in terms of this debate. Like, what should an AI be doing? What should a human be doing? Do
Yeah.
we lose our humanity? Do we lose all of our jobs? Like, what happens here with the outcomes of some of this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's what GPT said. Maybe that person needs a promotion. They obviously showed some good problem solving skills and some applied some good characteristics to figure out how to make their job more efficient. I mean, if everybody did that and companies took advantage of it, I think there's value that's created there. And people that have those skills, those are transferable skills, I would imagine, right? I think there's classes of jobs that will be eliminated just because they're so repetitive and don't require people very much. But there's also kind of the creepiness factor, the caveman effect, whatever, where there's certain things you just don't have the warm fuzziness of a machine. We're going to have synthetic fuzziness soon enough with agents and stuff. But
I got a question for you, Charles. I heard this the other day. I thought it was fascinating. Do you know what the number one employed job prior to like the invention of the automobile was?
Elevator operator?
No, it wasn't. It was whaler.
Whaler?
Yeah. So I guess, or maybe it wasn't the invention of the automobile. Maybe it was the invention of like extracting oil from the ground or something like that.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so they were using oil from whales for lamps.
Yeah.
And then immediately once oil started being extracted from the ground, that was overnight, those jobs went away. And I think you're going to see something along those lines with some of the repetitive jobs you see now. It's like there's going to be a time. I mean, remember, like, people used to be typists, like that was like a thing. And now everybody knows how to type.
Well, I always enjoy going through ONET, right? And one of the jobs in ONET, there's a bunch of jobs, I don't know if they've taken them out, that just don't exist anymore. But I said elevator operator because elevator operator was a job, and an important job, because the logic of what floors to go to and stuff was in your head. Well, now there's circuit boards and all kinds of things that do that. So you might find an elevator operator in a place that's trying to be super luxurious and old school, but as a host for the elevator ride, he's probably heard a lot of elevator pitches, right? But
nice one.
Yeah, about the Peter principle, right? People rise to the level of their incompetence. So what does AI do for that? We talked about people like making their jobs easier, and then could they get promoted? Is there an AI Peter principle where incompetent AIs get lauded and people are excited about it? I don't know if there's an example of that or not, but
you see, you went in a totally different direction than what I was thinking. I was thinking that AIs in conjunction with human beings would actually raise the ceiling of Peters to get higher and higher, because they would be more have more power at their disposal using these AIs.
Very interesting. I like that. Or, but in an organization where there's, AI agents doing stuff, I wonder if, I don't know. There's so many offshoots of all this stuff, but let's pull it back into, people analytics and our audience. So I think a good amount of our audience are non-IOs. I'm always striving for that, And
do
so
it, man. That's what we try to do.
Yeah. And, sometimes I worry, we get so esoteric with the IO stuff, but that's just who I am. I live a dual life of, not really a dual life. I'm a scientist practitioner, for God's sake.
Exactly.
And so
we
do that.
We're double agents by nature.
Yeah, exactly. And I've always been very diplomatic and able to work the middle ground of stuff, see both sides of it, etc. So if you're talking to people, that are in talent acquisition, who I would think would be our primary audience, because we're science for hire, of course. What would you say to those people about a people analytics function, how they could, think about utilizing that function? Because I'm sure a lot of people analytics serve as internal consultants, internal center of excellence that move around to different business units and problems. So how should an internal person in hiring think about their people analytics function or the need for one, et cetera, right?
I'll say recruiters and sourcers don't just automatically come to thinking about people analytics, but I will say that people who lead talent acquisition are almost always some of the first adopters of people analytics internally, because operationally, to run their functions, they need to have those analytics, whether it be something as simple as like time to fill, or how long a candidate has been in stage, like all of those kind of basic type of measures. But even when it comes to things more sophisticated, like how many people should we hire next year? What are our hiring plans and projections? What are the projections of turnover and the gaps that's going to create in the organization, and just more workforce planning more generally? people analytics can make those talent acquisition leaders really shine. And so I think that they are usually some of the first adopters of this type of work.
So here's a thought I had. If you walked the floor at HR Tech and you said that all those things that you needed, there'd be a lot of people from companies with large booths who would say, "Oh, you don't need a people analytics platform for that, or person for that. You need our platform. We can pull all that data together, and we have all these dashboards. And why even bother hiring somebody for that?" And so, what would your response to that be? I could tell you what mine is, but you have more perspective probably. Can you automate a lot of that stuff you just talked about to our earlier conversation, a people analytics specialist wouldn't even be needed because the dashboard would show you all that crap?
Well, I'll say, first of all, ideally, those platforms could do what they say, but generally speaking, they are not so plug and play that you can just turn them on and it fixes everything. Those tools just don't exist. And so you need somebody who can actually run these tools internally. That's problem number one. Problem number two, and this is a big and multifaceted problem, is just data quality, data privacy, getting data to merge from one place to another. None of these tools do that. You have to have human beings who can do that and improve it and make these things work. Kind of to the story you mentioned earlier about every blue moon, you work with a team that has all your data in a perfect place and they just give it to you when you need it. That took a lot of work to get to that point. And none of the technologies just do that natively. And so you've got to have a very talented team to get to that point of maturity. And I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Gotcha. Here, I like to think about, I love analogies. I've always been good at it. So I'd say that receiving a data set a lot of times is analogous to looking at the street after a Mardi Gras parade. It's cluttered with all kinds of crap.
Chaos.
And to be able to use the street again, you got to clear all the crap out of there. It's not a perfect analogy, but that's what popped into my head. And there's a lot of that cleaning. Now, I've been hearing, and I've never tried this, but I've been hearing, you can feed a data set to ChatGPT and say, clean this data set for me. I'm sure you have to give it more parameters than that. I don't know if I trust that, but I mean, I think where we're headed, so that's a segue into this, and we'll start wrapping up soon, but because we could go on forever with this, but there's a kind of the next evolution of all this stuff that there's the CEO, I can't remember his name I can't remember the name of the CEO or the company, but he talked about, so I can't give a reference people could look at, but he talked about the future of all this stuff moving into what he calls interactive AI, which is essentially that you have an agent and you say, hey, I need to find an answer to this problem. And the agent is running a lot of little models underneath it. It understands how to stitch them together and it gives you an output, right? So my point is, like, we're headed toward that, but there's still that fundamental question of, do you trust it? I mean, you got to have a leap of faith. So, would you trust GPT to clean a data set for you, or have you ever tried anything like that?
Yes and no, in the sense that I have a lot of these like standard like go-to things I say around these things because I speak on it often, and I just wrote a book or a white paper that was like 50 pages long on people analytics operating models with generative AI.
Yeah.
What's that?
You need one of these. Every time you have a standard answer, if you have this set up, you just hit the button. And
exactly. Just automate me. Yeah. You don't need me on the podcast. Just automate it. But the thing I'd say is I'm waiting on these autonomous agents, right? Because that's what they're called. And here's the example I use. I'll talk about the data set in a second, but I want an autonomous agent to manage my calendar for me. And since AI has gone live, people have told me over and over again, it's like, there's going to be this AI that's going to manage your life for me. And I haven't seen it yet. And so I am waiting for the day I can turn over my life to an autonomous agent that can do all the things, to schedule my appointments, cancel things, move it around, find things on my calendar, give me breaks in my day, that knows me better than I know myself. I want that so badly. And so I think there is a little bit of hype in this space. So like, oh, that's right around the corner. That's right around the corner. It's like, was the corner a year from now? Is it 5 years from now? Like, when is it? Because I want to see these things and I want to get past the hype. In terms of the data management example, I would never encourage you, if you're using proprietary data, to just put it into one of these open AIs that are out there.
Right.
Like, that is
Good
a
answer.
bad idea. The thing
Good
is, and
answer.
this change is occurring quite rapidly, is a lot of companies are investing in closed AI systems that are accessible just to their employees. I would say if you have that type of system, absolutely try it out, but I would measure twice, cut once, because it can
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
do some things really fantastically and it can probably screw up things royally, and you've got to learn the
Exactly.
difference.
Yeah. So one again, thoughts here. So if I had an an AI agent that handled my calendar, it would need to know how to make up believable excuses for things that I didn't really want to do, right? So is AI good at that? That's where you start to really get into the,
Yeah, but
you
then
know,
the excuses are going to go to the other person's AI agent that is going
right,
to show that's like, actually, this is BS. Charles just didn't want to meet
right.
with you.
Right. And do you trust it? And then, I mean, I just think of, so I don't use an Alexa or any kind of personal assistant. I keep thinking even when you see the commercials like, Alexa, order me more diapers. Do you really need that? It's like a Wi-Fi refrigerator. I mean, do you really need a Wi-Fi refrigerator? Come on. So a lot of that stuff to me is just kind of neat stuff, or it's just home automation, turn on the lights or whatever. I mean, it's kind of okay. So we have that nailed down, and we don't really need it, I don't think, quite honestly. But I'm sure we will have those type of AIs that do that. It's just the sophistication and the capabilities they have to manage kind of less scripted, more subtle conversation. So it's the same exact conversation you have about using AIs to do a lot of stuff. But you're right about and that's another big thing about using these things internally. And I would imagine something that people analytics folks would face a lot if they wanted to use an LLM or their company wanted them to use one or whatever is that data security issue. So, I'm sure there are applications. I was just in San Fran visiting with a friend of mine. I'm going to have him on the show. He doesn't do anything like what we do, but he's got a startup where he's built a platform that you can run different LLMs on that keeps them contained, but you can use external ones. I'm learning how it all works, but there's a need in the market apparently for this. And it made sense because I immediately said, well, there's probably some HR technology companies that could build something like that into their product, right? So it's a lot of applications, but it's very clear that data security and privacy is a guiding force in all AI ethics or any ethics really.
Well, if this technology revolution is anything like the prior ones that have happened in the last 20 years, HR will be the last one to adopt it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
I look forward in other places first, and then HR will get it as the last to eat.
yeah. I would agree with that. We don't need to even start going into that whole thing, but you know, people analytics transcend HR. Do you sit within HR? Obviously, that's people, but like, is there a hope that people analytics could rise above the stigma or whatever
Yeah.
of HR?
Oh, I am very much in this camp. I've talked about this a lot before. Is people analytics needs to ascend in the sense that right now, when they talk about people analytics not being a part of HR, they just mean, well, let's put it in IT or something like that, and that's usually a horrendous answer. That's not usually very good. But what I mean is, perhaps in the future, HR is people analytics, right? And that's
Right.
all HR is. And
Mm,
I actually am I think that's an exciting future. I think that that's a probable future. And the reason why I say that is because if you're using AI, you're using data and you're training models and to automate what HR does, what function in HR is most likely to be the most progressive and the most that's used to doing this type of thing on a daily basis? The only one that's even close is people analytics. Therefore,
mm-hmm.
who's going to be driving the ship on this transition is going to be people analytics. And therefore, who are going to be the leaders of the future? I think it's going to be people analytics. And so I think that not only will people analytics be like usually right now, people analytics just gives recommendations to other people and they make those decisions. in the future, I actually think people analytics will be the decision maker themselves. And I think that's an exciting future.
And that is an exciting future. And I'm doing something right now. I'm multitasking. I'm asking ChatGTP to tell me a joke about people analytics.
It probably won't be funny.
It's really good. No, it's corny usually, and it was also overtaxed. The server was overtaxed this morning, and I wasn't able to get through. So let's see what happens. Tell me a joke about people analytics. Okay, you ready for this?
Sure.
Oh my gosh. That's really a horrible joke. I'll read it. I'm going to ask for another one. Why did the people analytics team get excited about their latest report?
I don't know. You tell me.
Because they finally found out what everyone in the office was thinking. They all wanted a coffee machine in the break room.
Wow. Hilarious.
Yeah, that's like ridiculously not even funny at all. This is the last one, I promise. Why don't people analytics experts play hide and seek?
I don't know. You tell me.
This one's making me chuckle. Because good luck hiding when they've already predicted your next 5 moves.
I think that's what people worry about for sure, but I don't think we're that good.
That one's pretty good, though. It does come up with some good ones. So cool. Well, look, leave us with some parting stuff. I always open the door for promo, and I'm gonna pump your podcast again too, as a template for a fun and exciting educational podcast, Directionally Correct. But beyond that, what do you want to leave our audience with?
Yeah.
So they walk away with a smile and thinking, man, Cole Napper, what a guy.
Well, I mean, yeah, if you're interested in anything I said, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Definitely check out Directionally Correct. But I would say, listen to Charles. Science for Hire. You guys, he's literally and metaphorically going to be on a rocket ship. I'm excited to see where you're going with this, Charles. And you're obviously a really interesting and eclectic dude, so I'm a fan.
Cool. Well, thanks. Likewise. Good stuff. Well, until next time, bid you adieu.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
As we wind down today's episode, dear listeners, I want to remind you to check out our website, rockethire.com, and learn more about our latest line of business, which is auditing and advising on AI-based hiring tools and talent assessment tools. Take a look at the site. There's a really awesome FAQs document around New York City Local Law 144 that should answer all your questions about that complex and untested piece of legislation. And guess what? There's going to be more to come, so check us out. We're here to help.